Maria's hands trembled as she stared at the eviction notice taped to the front door of Esperanza's kitchen. 23 years of her life, every dollar she'd ever saved, every dream she dared to whisper in the dark, all of it reduced to 60 days' notice in cold, legal language. The restaurant that bore her grandmother's name, the place where she'd served her first customer with shaking hands and a heart full of hope, was slipping through her fingers like sand. The lunch crowd had dwindled to practically nothing over the past 6 months. What used to be a bustling neighborhood gem filled with the aroma of her abuela's recipes now echoed with empty chairs and the ghost of better days. Food critics had been brutal after her longtime head chef left for a trendy downtown establishment, taking half her staff with him. The reviews stung. Bland, uninspired, a shadow of its former self. Maria pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the door, watching the last of the evening commuters hurry past without so much as a glance at her restaurant. She was 42 years old, a single mother to twin daughters starting their sophomore year of college, and she was about to lose everything. The weight of it all settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. The bell above the door chimed, and Maria quickly wiped her eyes before turning around. A man stood uncertainly in the entrance, tall and lean, with calloused hands and shoes that had seen better years. His jeans were clean but faded, his flannel shirt pressed but worn thin at the elbows. What struck her most was the way he held himself, shoulders squared despite obvious hardship, eyes that held both determination and desperation. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "I saw your help wanted sign in the window. I know it's late, but I was wondering if you might still be hiring." Maria glanced at the faded sign she'd forgotten to take down weeks ago. She'd given up hope of finding someone she could afford. Anyone with real culinary skills commanded wages she simply couldn't pay. "I'm sorry, but we're not really." "Please," the man interrupted, then immediately looked embarrassed by his urgency. "I'm Marcus Williams. I've got 15 years of kitchen experience, and I'm not looking for much. Just enough to keep a roof over my daughter's head." Something in his voice made Maria pause. She recognized the edge of desperation because she heard it in her own voice every morning when she called suppliers, begging for extended payment terms. "What kind of experience?" Marcus straightened slightly. "Started washing dishes when I was 16, worked my way up through prep, line cook, sous chef. Did a stint at a barbecue joint in Memphis, then some family restaurants in Atlanta before." He trailed off, his jaw tightening. "Before life got complicated, and now you're in Chicago. Following a job lead that didn't pan out. My daughter Emma and we've been staying at the shelter downtown, but she starts 4th grade next week, and I need to get us settled." His voice cracked slightly on his daughter's name. "Look, I know you probably need someone with fancy credentials, but I promise you won't find anyone who'll work harder." Maria felt something stir in her chest. Recognition, maybe, or just the echo of her own desperation. She was down to her last cook, Miguel, who was 73 and could barely handle the prep work anymore. "I can't pay much," she said honestly. "Minimum wage, maybe $1 more if things pick up." "That's more than I've got now," Marcus replied without hesitation. Against every rational thought screaming in her head, Maria found herself nodding. "Can you start tomorrow?" The relief that washed over Marcus's face was so profound it made Maria's chest tight. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you. You won't regret this." But as she watched him walk away into the Chicago dusk, Maria wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. She couldn't afford to train someone new, couldn't afford to have the kitchen run any less efficiently than it already was. Yet something about Marcus Williams made her want to take the risk. The next morning, Marcus arrived 30 minutes early, clean-shaven and eager. Maria showed him around the kitchen, introducing him to Miguel, who grunted a greeting in Spanish. The morning prep went smoothly enough. Marcus moved with the confident efficiency of someone who'd spent years in professional kitchens. He asked thoughtful questions about the menu, about her suppliers, about the neighborhood. It was during the lunch rush that everything changed. They were down to their last portion of the day's special, her grandmother's famous mole poblano, when a table of 6 walked in. Food bloggers, Maria realized with growing panic, recognizing one of them from his scathing reviews 6 months earlier. Miguel was struggling with the grill, and their one server looked frazzled. "We're out of the mole," Miguel called out in heavily accented English. Maria's heart sank. The mole was the only dish that still drew occasional praise, and turning away potential reviewers felt like sealing her restaurant's fate. Wait, Marcus said quietly. He'd been watching the ticket machine, learning the flow of orders. I might be able to help. Marcus, you don't understand. That recipe is complex, I know, but I've been watching Miguel all morning, and I think I caught the base technique. He was already moving toward the spice rack, his hands sure and steady. My grandmother in Memphis, she had a mole recipe too. Different from yours, but the principles are the same. Trust me. Maria looked at the table of bloggers, at Miguel's apologetic shrug, at Marcus's steady gaze. She had nothing left to lose. Okay. What happened next was like watching magic. Marcus moved through the kitchen with a grace Maria hadn't seen since her grandmother's day. He toasted spices with the instinct of someone who understood not just recipes but the soul of cooking. He tasted constantly, adjusting, balancing flavors with an intuition that couldn't be taught. But it wasn't just technique. As he worked, Marcus began to hum, a low, melodic sound that seemed to fill the kitchen with warmth. Miguel straightened, moving with renewed energy. Even their frazzled server smiled as she passed through. What is that? Maria asked. Something my grandmother used to say, Marcus replied, not looking up from the mole. She believed food cooked with love tastes different. Not just the technique or the ingredients, the intention behind it. 30 minutes later, Maria carried the plates to the bloggers' table with hands that barely shook. She watched their faces as they took their first bites, saw their eyes widen with surprise, then close with something that looked like bliss. The head blogger, the one who'd written the brutal review, flagged her over. Excuse me, he said, but this mole is extraordinary. It's familiar yet completely unique. Who's your chef? Maria glanced back toward the kitchen, where Marcus was already prepping for the dinner rush. Someone new, she said. Someone special. The review that appeared online 3 days later changed everything. Esperanza's kitchen has found its soul again, it read. The mole poblano is transcendent, a perfect marriage of tradition and innovation that speaks to both heritage and hope. Within a week, they had a waiting list for dinner reservations. Within a month, Maria was able to bring back 2 of her former servers. Marcus had moved from minimum wage to a salary that let him and Emma rent a small apartment just 6 blocks from the restaurant. But the real transformation wasn't in the numbers, it was in the kitchen itself. Marcus had brought something intangible but essential, the understanding that cooking was about more than just food. It was about connection, community, hope served one plate at a time. You know what your secret ingredient is? Maria asked him one evening as they closed up together, the restaurant full of the satisfied hum of another successful night. Marcus smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. Same as yours, he said. We cook like our lives depend on it. Because they do. 6 months later, as Maria watched Marcus teach Emma how to fold empanadas in the corner booth while the dinner crowd buzzed around them, she realized that sometimes the most desperate decisions lead to the most beautiful discoveries. She'd hired a broke single dad out of desperation, but he'd brought her something priceless, the reminder that the best food, like the best life, is seasoned with kindness, stirred with purpose, and served with love. Esperanza's kitchen was no longer just surviving, it was thriving, one perfectly imperfect meal at a time.